And a very good afternoon to you all, and thank you so much for joining our Lunch and Learn PPMA session. And today I'm delighted to say that we're joined by colleagues from Penna. I'm just going to ask you if you could, before I go any further, just to turn off your microphones for me, just keep them on silent. That would be perfect. And today we're going to be looking at the subject of employee value proposition. And I can't really think of an organization better fitted to talk about this. I've been following the work that Penna have been doing for the past couple of years, and it's really fantastic. You know, when you actually come across an organization who put into practice the stuff that they talk about and doing it so beautifully well and having such a powerful impact is really great to see. So today we're joined by Keith Pilling and Kadie Hodges and Tristan from the Penna team. And Keith, I'm going to hand over to you, but before I ask you to kick off, just what I've been doing with our guests when they've arrived is get them to share something about this interesting time of lockdown, and what have you discovered about yourself which has been of interest or challenge to you during this period?
What have I discovered about myself?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I think probably the biggest thing I've discovered about myself is actually how much I actually thrive in the office environment. You know, it's kind of one of those things that we always long to kind of work from home more effectively and more frequently. But I actually realise that I do struggle with my own company sometimes. So yeah, it's been a bit of a challenge coming into the office, as in down the stairs and into my own little office here. So yeah, I think I've really discovered that I do actually like being around people a lot more than I have been.
Well, today we've got a few people with us, few people with us on the session. So whilst it's virtual, let's hope that we make you feel a sense of belonging. And any questions that you've got throughout the session, please pop them in chat and I'll pick up with the team at the end of the session. But for the time being, over to yourself, Keith, and thanks again.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm Keith Pilling. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Penna. So kind of right in the thick of it when it comes to how we deal with our own EVP, which is why I thought it might be useful for me to kind of kick it off. Clearly, I'm trying to abide by all of the rules of confidence. You can see that I've got a bookcase behind me there, out of focus, so you can't see that the reading matter. But it's changed everything, hasn't it? This whole crisis has changed everything to how we kind of do meetings like this, to how we communicate with our employees. And I just wanted to kind of set the scene, not really to try to introduce EVP, but to introduce how I think it's kind of changed and why it's really important now, because like everything we're doing at the moment, the current pandemic is making us kind of rethink about how we not just operate on a day-to-day basis, but now particularly how we kind of respond to something that, if we're really honest, no one ever really predicted. Obviously, as kind of managers in a business, we all had our disaster recovery plans in place. But I think a global pandemic was probably just a couple of places above a meteor strike. So most of our kind of disaster recovery plans were around immediate tech failure, civil unrest even. And we tended to be around those short-term fixes before we returned very quickly to normal service. So that's where our disaster recovery plans tended to be. But we now find ourselves kind of building the effects of this pandemic into our long-term business plans. And that's why things like an EVP become really, really important and why it's particularly relevant today. And as leaders in a business, we've got to ask ourselves how we use all the tools at our disposal in a different way to respond to the current pandemic and the emerging economic situation. So I would say employer branding pre-COVID-19 was more around a message to potential employees. You know, how do we become the employer of choice? How do we attract the very best talent to come and work for us? And that's still going to be the case. But probably in the short term, I'd say it's more around those difficult to fill areas, such as social care and health, senior transformational roles, technical roles, retail staff, delivery staff, etc. And I think the biggest change, therefore, for EVP is going to be how we deliver messages to the people who already work for us. There is no getting away from it. You know, this is a major crisis. We're all in it together. And we all actually know the one certainty is that we manage through a crisis by communicating. delivering clear, strong and consistent and frequent messages to those we employ. And with most people working from home for the last few months and foreseeable future, delivering a strong employer brand message to our people is going to be paramount to keep the leadership within our business. And remote working, flexible working was often the key to an effective EVP. And I think we can kind of agree that that cat is definitely out of the bag now. So we've got to be looking at how we support our people in this new employment world. So new thinking in our EVPs for the short term is going to be around supporting remote working, making the workplace a safe environment to return to, and communicating those clear plans to our people. And then we need to change that messaging, because looking forward, it's going to be around what are the changing needs of our employees in this different working environment. Is a safer environment now going to be more important than maybe a pay increase? And we talk of pay freezes, not just in the public sector, across the private sector as well, where we need to look at other motivating factors to attract and to retain our talent. So the message for me about EVP is that the actions of employers during this crisis, so how you treat your employees, will have a huge impact on your brand and your brand reputation with both the communities you serve, your customers, and the people who work for you and the people you need to attract. So EVP is kind of widened out for me, not just the people you want to attract, but your whole kind of employees as well. So the message around this is how you deliver it means that as an effective employer value proposition, it's never been more important as it is now. So how we respond to this, how we respond as employers is all around your EVP, your brand, with the people that we employ and the people that you're looking to employ. So with that in mind, I believe that's why EVP should be top of your list of things to look at now. And I'm going to hand you over to Tristan and Kadie to explain a little bit more. Tristan?
Perfect. Thank you, Keith. So I very, very quickly just want to kick off with some kind of distinctions to be drawn and some definitions around EVP itself. So as we kind of mentioned, as Keith mentioned at the beginning there, EVP is the employer value proposition, and it quite often gets misused and abused as a term and thrown around a lot in certainly the recruitment space. When we talk about employer brand, what we mean is the perception that exists already out there in the world about you as an organisation, and specifically as an employer. The EVP is the work that we do to actually define a unique proposition for your organisation to start to affect that employer brand. So the EVP will generally be something that you've developed off the back of perhaps some research, talking to your staff, talking to potentially external candidates, and trying to identify that kind of sweet spot in the middle, the intersection between what your audience is looking for, so the people you want to recruit or potentially the people you already employ, and what you're actually able to offer. That unifying bit is the bit that will motivate people to join your organisation and hopefully to stay there and flourish as well. So that's what EVP means, but we wanted to look at a little bit of how that might be being affected, I suppose, by the current circumstances and where we think this might be going in the long run.
Thanks, Tristan. Firstly, I just want to apologise because my hay fever is awful, so I might be snivelling through this. I'm sure there's probably a few other people that feel my pain right now. So, like Tristan said, the current context of what's going on in the world is affecting employer brand, and we like to read up on kind of human biases, what makes people tick within the strategy team. And something we think is really pertinent right now is something called normalcy bias. Some of you might have heard of it. I think this picture articulates it quite well. And what it is the human being's tendency to keep calm in a crisis and pretend that everything's okay. And that's not our fault. It's an innate kind of defense mechanism, really, so that when something goes wrong, we apply kind of our normal context to try and cope with the situation and pretend that everything is going to be okay. So you see it in America when hurricanes are being forecasted. People don't leave their home even though they've got prior warning because of this kind of tendency. And within this context, really, there's two ways of looking at it. It's the danger of thinking, you know, this isn't a crisis right now, everything's fine, we don't really need to react, or after this, everything will go back to normal and we don't need to change anything. And that's quite, I guess, a dangerous position to be in, because actually a lot has changed, and with that we do need to make changes to the way we communicate with our workforce, the messagings that we've got out in the market at the moment, and how we identify potentially as an employer moving forward. There's been some real winners and losers so far, and I think the next slide articulates that quite nicely. And this is probably a example of a brand that was affected by the normalcy bias at the start, pretending that sort of everything's normal. We still want our workforce to come into business. It's business as usual. We're essential service potentially, and obviously the criticism that they've received from their treatment of their staff and kind of attitude at the start really has impacted their brand and potentially could do a lot of damage moving forward. So there's a risk there around making sure that you don't stand still and you listen to what you need to be hearing right now, and not kind of taking a approach where everything feels like it's fine and not taking action.
So we've got a few examples, and I think a lot of them have hit the sort of mainstream press as well, as to how different organisations have reacted either early on in the crisis or in sort of the subsequent weeks. And yeah, it's interesting to see that there's plenty of evidence of organisations willing things to be normal, even though they're not, and almost kind of refusing to accept that, you know, things have changed and they need to kind of change with it. So hopefully, as much as there are some lessons to be learned from organisations that have perhaps got it wrong, there are also some lessons that will come onto from organisations we think have got it right, which is always good to hear. So we've, I suppose at Penna we've got our own 5 tests that we can suggest applying to an EVP. And actually, unlike the government, we're adding one more bonus test as well. So the 5 tests that we've got here are things that you can use to, I guess, diagnose or evaluate how appropriate and fit for purpose your EVP is, even in normal times. And the 6th one is a bonus one that we've added in for now, and for dealing with, I suppose, times of crisis that we're in at the moment. So we hope that this can act as a bit of a self-diagnosis test that you can take away and use at home, and test out your own organisation's EVP. So the first one, it's difficult to figure out which order to go in because they're sort of in a hexagon. But the first one I'll talk about is distinctiveness. So this is always important, and we'll kind of talk about some of the ways in which the organisations are really not fulfilling this at the moment. But the whole point of the EVP is to find your unique position in the market, as it were, to talk about your organisation in a way that distinguishes it not just from just every other employer out there, but specifically distinguishes you from your nearest competitors, let's say. So what distinguishes you within your industry, within your sector? Why should people choose you yourselves? And that's a really good test, because quite often we'll see that, you know, some organisations might end up with an EVP which could be true of about a dozen other organisations, and that's usually the time that you need to kind of reevaluate it. The next one is kind of honesty. It's always going to be important to have an EVP that is truthful, whether that's reflecting the organisation as it stands today, or at least reflecting an honest assessment of where it's going or where it's aiming to be. What we're seeing is this is being really tested at the moment, because organizations that aren't honest or are trying to pretend that things are perhaps rosier than they are will really feel the consequences of either their current employees or potential candidates rejecting and disbelieving something that just doesn't ring true, essentially. So honesty is another important test that we'd like to kind of see out there, and to apply to any kind of EVP that's in place. And the next one is it inspiring? So I guess the test on this one is whether or not your EVP is sufficiently motivating to the audience to actually do something differently, and do that through feelings. So do they feel inspired to join your organization, or do they feel inspired enough to kind of stay and thrive at that organization? The pitfall here is that you end up with an EVP that's really just a description of your organization, you know, the sort of thing that you might find on Wikipedia. And that's not really an effective way of using an EVP to kind of for competitive advantage against other organizations. So it's important that when you reflect on your EVP, when you look at it, is it inspiring? Is it inspiring emotionally? Will someone feel, you know, actually I really believe in that, and that's something that would make me feel much better about working there?
Exactly. And I think the next one about being open really kind of draws off that as well. And what we mean here is being open to the whole organisation. So your EVP needs to feel like something that is built on the voice of your employees. It can't be a message that, especially right now, feels like it's projected from top down, really, because people won't connect with it, and it almost in a sense feels enforced. So it really needs to sort of come from the ground up, from the roots, and that comes from being open and inviting that dialogue with your employees to truly understand, you know, how they're feeling, what's the sense of culture right now, has that changed, and really openly listening to the temperature check of your organization. That's always been the case, but I think it's even more important now to make sure that you're really kind of being open with your messaging. Versatility is really important, and again, that's always been something that's been at the forefront of an EVP. Often people can tend to think of it as something that's, we've done it now, we've done the research, this is our messaging, and we'll keep it in place for, you know, X amount of years. And ultimately, it's about thinking of your EVP as an organic matter, really, something that's constantly growing, evolving and shifting depending on how your organization's changing over time. Nothing really ever stands still. So it's making sure that you're dialing up different things that you want to at that current time, which is appropriate. And often that's done through pillars. EVPs tend to be built on sort of X amount of pillars. It can be 3 to 7, whatever, and it's about really dialing up what do you want to push right now, and what's important to be said for your brand. So making sure that you're not just having a one-size-fits-all approach and constantly being reviewing of what your message is. And lastly, the bonus one, so reassuring. So I think especially now, like I said, everyone can feel that need for security and comfort is more strong. So really, this is from reassuring your kind of employees at the moment that you have about how they're being supported within the business, where you're going, but also reassuring for prospective candidates about how they'll be looked after in the future. What kind of how is your brand going to value them? Flexible working, Keith spoke about at the start. So all of those things, people's need for that reassurance piece is more pertinent, especially when people are joining organisations that they can't go in physically, meet their team members and get that kind of physical reassurance. So that is something as well that really needs to come through.
So you could sort of argue that this kind of reassurance is something people always need to a small degree, but I don't think in any other sort of circumstances it would be so high on the priority list for, like Kadie says, current employees and prospective candidates as well. So it's something that we'd probably be looking as adding to the test right now is are you giving that level of assurance to people to kind of acknowledge anxieties that exist right now that probably we haven't had before. So we kind of wanted to pick on a few examples of employers that are specifically doing different things that we think demonstrate that they have a good EVP already, or at least have a good way of responding to their employer brand. So the first of these is Timpson. So it's a bit of an interesting employer. So this was obviously a national retailer with very sort of tiny little branches in stations and all across the country that was pretty quickly shut down early on in the current crisis for obvious reasons, then cautiously tried to kind of reopen. But unlike a lot of its, sort of high street retail competitors, let's say, they did a very good job of protecting their employees. Essentially, very quickly decided we're going to shut down, very quickly decided we're going to retain everyone at 100% pay, at least for the foreseeable future. And when you actually look into the Timpson story, it's a very strong one going back years, the way in which they have shown a track record of looking after their staff, doing the right thing in general terms, and having a kind of a good set of values, shows that this is really an organization who have an honest EVP and a versatile one as well, because when the crisis hit, of course, as a business, they'll be massively impacted, but they've done a lot or put a lot in place to make sure that in the long run, at least, they'll probably survive from an employer brand perspective as well. So a lot of lessons to be learned, we think, from Timpson. The next one was perhaps slightly more high profile, and it's the Formula One team, specifically Mercedes Formula One. So when the crisis hit, Formula One was about to start and couldn't. And these organizations are really set up to kind of run off a specific calendar financially anyway. So they're all suffering greatly from the lack of racing. But Mercedes F1 in particular focused on saying, right, well, we can't have our people preparing race cars for races, but what we can do is have our brilliant engineers do something that will make a difference for people's lives and that current health crisis. So they got them to very quickly design a ventilator, and it was one of the few that actually made it through to being approved for actual usage, which is a great story. And just imagine being an employee of Mercedes F1, knowing that when it was most needed, your employer, your sort of direct managers essentially said, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get you working, but we're going to get you to produce this thing here. So a great story and probably lasting effects for their brand.
Yeah, and from a kind of more advertising focus, British Gas, I'm sure everyone's seen this, is a really nice example of a brand that's done something different in the market. I'm sure we've all got Zoom ad fatigue from the same sort of template being used. I think what's interesting as well from brands doing realigning their kind of brand messages that they're putting out externally, it's the first time we're really seeing employees becoming the kind of core focus of marketing material. You know, before you wouldn't really largely see employees being such a key selling factor for brands, whereas it's all we're seeing right now. But what's nice about this is it hasn't followed a template. It still feels British Gas, and it's an ad that wouldn't have looked out of place 6 months ago, which is why it still is really aligned to their EVP. They haven't tried to shoehorn any kind of COVID-19 messaging into it, really, because it delivers the practical message, which is what, you know, their audience are going to want to know, is whether I can get my boiler fixed in this crisis. So it's a really nice example of being honest to your EVP, and again, that versatility and being open as well. So it's a favourite of ours, I think. So we just wanted to leave you with some pointers around what can you do in the short term and longer term to realign your EVP. And I think that's a key word, is realignment. We're not talking about reinvention right now. It's more about evolution of your brand. And in the short term, there's some few quick wins, which kind of come off the back of some of the examples we've spoken about. So a key one being actions over words, so showing what you're doing. You know, we all say talk is cheap, so, you know, really showing how as a brand you're taking action to live your values, and showcase who you really are is really integral, and is what people want to see right now. Changing the channel up as well, so thinking about where you're going, what messages you're putting out in the market. Does that need to be re-looked at? Do you need more of an internal focus? But equally as well, thinking about how you're looking for different skill sets. So there's going to be a lot of people within the market who are potentially looking for different careers, having to move into different sectors because of unfortunate circumstances. So how can you start to reach out to those audiences to try and showcase your brand, you know, for consideration later down the line? Focus inwardly. It seems obvious, but I think some people, some brands probably aren't thinking about it as much. So making sure that you're really listening to what your employees are saying, what's going on in your organisation, and how do you then adapt from that? And that leads on to the next point of listening first. Like I said at the start, you really don't want to be feeling like you're projecting a message down. You need to be listening to the sentiment and the culture and the feelings right now to make sure you're future-proofing your messaging. And again, testing and adapting. This isn't something that stands still, and it's fine if you don't get it right first time, but make sure that you're putting things out, seeing how they resonate, and constantly kind of reviewing that to make sure that you are getting the best out of your brand message.
So just very quickly, some of the longer term things that you probably want to do to kind of make sure that your EVP is fit and appropriate in the coming year and beyond. First of all, conduct more research. I mean, it's very likely that a lot of organizations will find that if they go out and speak to focus groups of their own people as well as the external candidates, they'll probably hear some different things to what they may have heard a year ago. And some of these will be lasting things as well. So there'll be elements that will come to the forefront that wouldn't have been so prominent previously. And that kind of links into the next point about using that added research and insight to really review your EVP. In most cases, hopefully that shouldn't mean throwing it away and starting again, but it may need dialing up on some aspects and dialing down others, and really sort of shifting it to be more relevant to the audience that you've got today. Collect stories. At some point, there'll be times when you'll want to kind of use examples of how your organization changed, responded, adapted, what your employees did. A lot of that will be happening right now, but it will probably be stuff that you'll want to talk about in coming months and years. And now's the time to really take note of those so that you can kind of use them later on. And then really think about retention. So whether it's about people who are going to be with your organization now and forever, or maybe returners who may not be with your organization now, but you want them to come back further down the line. a lot of the sort of the decisions and communication that be going on now will have an impact on people's loyalty. So that's kind of point around focusing inwardly is so crucial. What your current employees think will really shape and affect what the external market thinks in the long run. So that should be a clear focus. So thanks for your time. That's the end of our slides.
Oh, that was great. Thank you all. And just conscious of time, but there's a really interesting question that's come in from Sam Monteith. And Sam, thanks for the question, which is, I think, relevant for everybody out there. And there might be a tension between being open and honest and being reassuring right now, picking up on those tests that you shared. The reality might be that employers don't know even the near future. Any thoughts on how to approach that kind of balance between being open and honest and reassuring?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Sam. And I think the answer's in the question. Certainly, and I can just speak from experience here in terms of how you message in a business and actually being open and honest. I've found will be reassuring. So even if you don't know the answers as an employer, explaining to the business where we're at, listening to the business and getting the feedback so people feel part of that plan. At the moment, COVID-19 feels like it's being done to us. It is being done to us and we feel out of control. So putting some control in the business plan will be reassuring to employees, the people that work with us. So actually by being open, being honest, sometimes saying we don't know, but this is what it's telling us and this is going to be the plan. We've got a conference on Friday. We're doing it virtually, and part of what we're going to be doing there is going to be asking everybody, asking all the family to say, well, what are your plans? How do we get out of this? How are you feeling about it? And not making any assumptions about how people are feeling, and then embodying those and taking those back in and making them as part of the plan. So that kind of honesty and that openness will reassure people as much as you can, and also being inclusive, making your people feel part of it, that they're actually delivering their own solutions is in my view the best approach to it, and not taking anything for granted. So as we kind of said before, everything that people have said before about what they want may well have changed. So let's check that before we make any assumptions. The real danger here is that we go, well, we know that's what people want, so let's give them that. Let's just check that first. So always ask the questions. So I think spending the time talking to people, talking to employees is really, really, really important. Whereas the imperative from your shareholders, your members, whoever that might be to answer some immediate questions on service delivery. But if you're going to bring people with you, it's no good having a plan if people aren't with you. So that engagement is really, really important.
It's great. Thanks, Keith.
The question.
And I think it probably demonstrates the a good subject matter for a follow-up session. I said at the beginning, I think Penna themselves are a great exemplar alongside Timpson's Formula One and British Gas of really living this whole concept of EVP. And it would be interesting to find out what you've been doing as an organization in terms of changing any emphasis, turning up the volume in those particular areas, and what and why and what impact it's got. So I really look forward to inviting you back onto a future program. And thanks.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that. Yeah,
cheers,
happy to share that.
Keith, Tristan and Kadie, thank you for your time, and everybody out there for tuning in. We've got a great podcast coming out this week from Karen Grave, who's been leading a really inspirational piece of work around care space with the NHS, so watch out for that. We have our daily mindfulness broadcasts at 7:45 every morning, every weekday morning, so please tune in for that. And next week, our guest is Kate Renner, who is a coach, an acting coach, and a personal trainer. And Kate will be sharing some hints and tips around putting yourself forward in terms of Zoom and these platforms where you've got to be broadcasting, giving you some ideas on how you can give your best over the airwaves. So tune in next Monday at 12 o'clock, and I look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, stay safe, and sending you all many thanks out there, PPMA members, for the great work that you're doing supporting your organizations. And catch up with you soon. Thank you again.